sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that kissed purity culture goodbye. I'm Christy Powell, the host who never waits for true love, and my guest tonight, an expert on sex and God if there ever was one, Dr. Darrel Ray.
Hey, Christy, good to be back here tonight.
Yeah, for sure. We're always excited to have you on and have you, return to this thing that you've built.
Well, I'd say you guys have built a hell of a lot more than I did. I'm glad I got it started, but I'm more glad that you guys took it over. You're doing a super, super good job.
Hey, well, glad to hear it. And we're excited to hear from all of you. We're going to be talking tonight about purity culture, getting a little bit of a history on this sort of insidious social movement that I know so many of the folks who watch our shows have gotten themselves wrapped up in at various times of life, and maybe talk a little bit about what healing might look like. So give us a call, whether you want to talk about that or anything else that might be on your mind. We're going to be here at 512-991-9242. That's 512-991-9242. Or you can catch us online at tiny.cc/callsex. And make sure to give us a call now because the show is starting right now. All right, Darrel. Purity culture is certainly not a new idea for this show, as you all well know. But what are we referring to when we use that term?
Well, it's generally related to patriarchal religions of all kinds. It's not new to Christianity, but it's a philosophy, if you will, or an approach to sexuality that basically puts ownership of the sexuality of another human being in the hands of their parents. And it's done to both men and women in the Christian purity culture. But we could actually say that Islam has a deep purity culture, as does Hinduism have a deep purity culture. It's just that within Christianity, they've invented it or reinvented it in a pretty severe way recently. Now, if you go back to 1800s, there was a big purity culture. A woman, if a woman had sex before marriage, she had ruined her whole life pretty much, or got pregnant out of wedlock, she was ruined for life. And that was a sign of purity culture. And that's what we're seeing here today. This notion that if you have sex that's not ordained specifically by your religion and in the way of your religion, then you are somehow damaged pretty much for the rest of your life. Anyway, that's my quick summary of it. I think it goes far more than Christianity, but we're talking today mainly about Christianity, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. This is a pretty wide and history encapsulating idea in a lot of ways. But when would you say that the modern American purity culture movement began?
Well, I can say with a straight face almost that it didn't start in my day.
Sure.
I was having sex when I was 18. I had my first sexual experience with a 18. I was the religious one and she was not. And she was very interested in helping me get over my
Delilah led you astray.
And I'm so happy she did. But I felt so damn guilty about it afterwards, because even though it was before the purity culture, I did know that sex before marriage was supposedly wrong, although everybody else was doing it. I'm a 70-year-old, so I'm hip. I'm a hippie. I'm literally a hippie. So even though I don't have the long hair that you do, I
right. Yeah. I've reclaimed that.
Yeah. I was looking at some photographs of me for a project I was doing when I was 21 years old, and I had a Beatles haircut, and all my hair, you wouldn't believe it, but I had hair. And it was really funny. I look like Ringo Starr. I'm not kidding you. I look like Ringo Starr when I was that age. Couldn't play the drums, of course, but so anyway, purity culture came later. It came with, I think there was when Jerry Falwell first started the Moral Majority, that also started a bunch of other things. They brought in the Southern Baptist approach to human sexuality. And I could see growing up, I was 30 years old in 1980, but starting about 1980, I started seeing the purity culture, the elements of it. In fact, and it's related to Patrick Carnes' bullshit book about sex addiction that was published in 1982 or 3, I don't remember.
Mhm.
But, here's a guy talking about sex addiction, and here's the Baptist saying that if you have sex before marriage, you ruined your marriage. And, oh, by the way, you probably shouldn't be masturbating either. All these things start happening in the mid-'80s. And by the 90s, we're having purity balls, purity balls with fathers putting rings on their daughters. Now, that is fucking, that is weird. Fathers putting rings on their daughters.
It's amazing how normalized it is inside of those societies. I know myself and probably a lot of people listening are remembering like, I remember that. And it felt, if not normal, it was, we were supposed to believe that it was. And I think, I know I bought in.
Well, in some ways it was normal, quote unquote, in 1885 or 1812, but it was not normal after World War II. Especially with the invention of the pill and free love movement in the 60s, it was anything but normal. It was like there was a reaction to that in the late 70s on into the early 80s. And that's when I really saw purity culture starting. Now, of course, a lot of people are perpetuating it. And I mean, Josh, what's his name? Josh Harris.
Harris,
wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Well, he wrote that book like in 1999 or something. So it's a lot later than the 80s. But by that time, it had really taken hold, especially in the evangelical movement, the Baptists, all the fundamentalist groups. Because it's a patriarchal notion that the father owns the daughter, and until the daughter is, quote, given away to her future husband, he still owns her. And by the way, if she should do anything, it reflects on him. So it brings in the notion of male shame, that the father is shamed for the daughter's inappropriate, I'm going to quote, inappropriate sexual behavior before she's married. And of course,
for our podcast audience, I'm doing air quotes and rolling my eyes as hard as I possibly can.
Right, exactly. So ultimately, it's just a patriarchal notion, because once she gets married, then she's got a ring on her finger again from her husband. It's a fucked up way to look at people as autonomous. We're autonomous creatures within a cultural framework, but some of that culture, and all cultures, take some of our autonomy away from us. You can't avoid it.
It's a trade-off being in a society, sure.
Right, but some cultures take it way far until there is no autonomy, and that's what purity culture was, an attempt to take back some autonomy that people had been given or found in the late 50s through the 60s and early 70s. So it's a back and forth within the culture. But I don't think it would have been possible without Jerry Falwell and the moral majority and some of that political movement that started. I know this isn't a political podcast, but politics do play a role.
Of course.
And they started pushing notions of don't let schools teach sex education. And that was a Jerry Falwell. That was a Pat Robertson. Those fundamentalist groups were ranting and railing against secular sex education in the schools. And they began intimidating teachers and intimidating school boards, and then also getting elected to school boards so that sex education wouldn't be put in the school boards, which then allowed them to, actually start infiltrating the schools, because, love,
True Love Waits?
True Love Waits was actually taught in schools. And now it's not, quote, religious, supposedly, but it was religious. It was religiously inspired. And it's a school board with members that are from fundamentalist congregations that are approving that education. So the purity movement, you cannot separate the purity movement from the political environment that came out of the early 70s, and specifically the Reagan administration. Because Nancy Reagan she was all about just say no, just say no to drugs, just say no to sex. like don't get your advice from Nancy Reagan. I'm just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about Jerry Falwell and Patrick Carnes. I have to imagine that in addition to just sort of the pushback against the free love of the 60s and the widespread use of the pill and these things, that the AIDS crisis had to be a pretty meaningful motivator in, I guess, getting these ideas out there and finding a connection with people.
Yeah, the whole narrative around AIDS is the gay disease, and it's a judgment from God. This was being preached from the pulpits of every fundamentalist church, and some that weren't so fundamentalist, by the way. So that's actually a political message. It's a political message about whether LGBTQ people belong in our society, or whether we should allow them to be the human beings that they want to be within our society. It wasn't just about sex, but it was a great way for them to propagandize us based on disease. And if you think about it, going back for centuries, disease has always been the label of those who are in the out group, whether it was the Jews or the gypsies or the immigrants from Italy. It doesn't matter. Disease was the excuse for othering them, for putting them down, for making them second-class citizens. And it goes way back. It goes even into prehistory, or not prehistory, but into early ancient history. You can see disease as a reason for excluding people, whether it was perceived or real. I mean, the leper, the whole notion of lepers.
Oh yeah, I mean that's something that came up in our most recent political cycle, is we're talking about immigration and these different things, and
right.
Yeah, it's definitely a way of demonizing folks.
Right.
But I want to return to something you mentioned, true love waits, and I honestly missed out, if I can use that term, on that particular experience. So I'd love to get just a deeper understanding of what that program actually means, and what you see as sort of the impact on the way we view sex as a culture.
It is. And True Love Waits includes some rather insidious messages, which would include self-pleasure, masturbation. Basically the approach says that sex is God-given, and only people who are actually married under the aegis of their God are allowed to have sex. So by definition, any sex that's outside of this framework is illegal, illegitimate sex, and it's not blessed by God. So to masturbate means you are having sex outside of God's plan, quote plan. To have sex with your partner, whether they're, no matter if it's heterosex or gay sex or whatever sex you want, is still outside of God's plan if you don't have a ring on your finger, if you aren't owned by another person. And the ownership actually goes both ways, because Christians look at the married couple as owning each other, and Paul even talks about in the New Testament about you should please each other, and that's where the notion that you should have sex whether you want it or not because your partner wants it. There's no such thing as marital rape in the Bible. Yeah, that's true too.
I don't like to think about that overly much.
I don't know if that hits where you were looking to go, but that's that's the theology behind it, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I mean, this is an educational program that's being taught in schools and churches and things along those lines.
Yep, there's a whole curriculum around it, and they break out in small groups, and they have small group people talking to each other. Usually, a bunch of girls over here and a bunch of guys over here, and they're confessing that they've got, we have 15, 16-year-old kids going through this. And they've heard about sex addiction, and they've been told that you shouldn't masturbate or you shouldn't look at porn. And they're confessing to each other that I'm a porn addict or I'm a sex addict at 14 or 15. Well, I'll tell you, I've been a sex addict since I was 12 by that definition.
Sure.
I still am a sex addict at 70. So get over it. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, I'll have to pull up the old episode we did where you, I, and the rest of the crew all took a sex addiction survey, because I wasn't surprised that you and I scored really, really highly. I was a little embarrassed that nobody else on the cruise scored in the sex addiction range. If you're curious about that, I'll just give you the quick notes and say sex addiction is not a thing. You're fine. Yeah. Anyway, I I heard you name check Joshua Harris a moment ago, and I know I grew up reading I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and I know myself and a lot of the folks that are watching tonight, have seen firsthand what the impact of some of those ideas were. I know that whether they came straight from Joshua Harris in that book or not, I work with a lot of men in my counseling practice in their 20s and 30s that are still kind of stuck in this notion of courtship and that see dating as exclusively being on like an escalator towards, marriage. And I'm curious from the outside, just sort of watching that come out and become as popular as it did, what you can tell us about the impact of these ideas.
Well, I've seen massive amounts of impact. I think men and women, it's on both sides, are in many cases traumatized, but certainly, if not traumatized, brainwashed or indoctrinated into a rather bizarre view of sex and sexuality that prevents them. I mean, I don't know how many people have come to me, or we see this on Recovering from Religion. As you know, I'm the president and founder of that. In Recovering from Religion, we see people coming to us virtually every day saying something along the lines of, I waited. True love did wait. And I waited till I was married, and we had the most miserable sex life. I've had people say we didn't even have sex for the first 6 months of our marriage because we're too embarrassed or we're too shamed or something like that. I see this so much. So what they're getting is a message of condemnation and shame and judgment when they're still single, and when they get married, suddenly they can't turn that off. And they are now stuck with a sexual framework that prohibits them from enjoying their own body or enjoying the other person's body. It's insidious because it's hard to get out of that sometimes, as you know, and that's why people need to visit people like you. And I would say me, but I don't practice anymore. So people like you, it's an insidious message that undermines marital happiness. No matter what you do in your life, I think a lot of people discovered after this true love hits them and they realized, oh, this is bullshit, that they needed a lot more sexual experience before they made a commitment to a spouse. And I hear that a lot. I wish I hadn't bought into that. I wish I'd have gone out and experienced other people's bodies, other people's minds before I committed to the person I did commit to. And almost all the time they say, I have a perfectly good spouse. My husband or wife, my partner is wonderful and great. We're just terribly incompatible when it comes to sex. And I wouldn't have made that commitment if I'd have known that.
Aren't just something that a small group of people obsessed over, and we're not like examining some obscure book that was popular in the 90s. We're talking about something that's incredibly prevalent and that definitely touched my life and is honestly probably part of why I got into this line of work. I had so much to learn and so much to unlearn.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I could throw this in. We talked about it before we get into calls and stuff. I just like to let people know I'm always happy to be on Secular Sexuality, but I'm really happy to be on tonight because this is the time for Recovering from Religion's big fundraiser. And we are in the middle, we're at the beginning of our fundraiser. And I just wanted to talk. It'd be okay to say a little bit about that before we move on.
Yeah, please do. And I'll go ahead and mention that there is already a link in the show notes to this episode for everything Darrel's talking about. If you're listening to this, you have access to all of that information. But tell us about it. Walk us through a little bit what y'all's goals are.
Well, everything we do, we give away. We we provide for free. If somebody wants to call us free. If somebody wants to chat with us, the chat's free. If somebody wants to join our community, it's free. If somebody comes one of our support groups, it's free. All of our resources are free. Everything we do is free. With even a Secular is therapy project, the system is free, although the therapy itself costs money. We don't provide that. That's somebody else. But the fact is, it costs money to provide all this free service. And we probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 volunteers that are providing that service. And that's how we can do it. You know, we couldn't do it without the volunteers, but the technology costs money. Some of the travel we have to do costs money. There's resources. Some of the resources cost money. There's being online costs money. There's a lot of things that cost money. So we have to raise funds to make all this free stuff happen. And I'm here tonight to say Recover from Religion's having our fundraiser. The Friendly Neighborhood Atheist, Ethan Michaels, has been generous in offering to make this his thing. He's at his 1 year anniversary of a podcast, and he's making it a fundraiser for us. So we are delighted, and we really thank Ethan for doing that. So anyway, we'd just like you to get online. If you got a few bucks, throw them our way. If you don't mind, we'd really like people to donate monthly, even if it's a small amount. That helps us budget what we're going to do. But above all, find out who we are. And if you're interested in contributing and you don't have any money, that's fine. Come volunteer for us. We're always looking for volunteers, and we're looking for people that want to help other people. You don't have to have any special qualifications. We will train you, and we have damn good training. And I'll guarantee that you will probably leave, or when you're finished with our training, you'll be able to use those skills, not just for Recover from Religion, but you'll be able to use them with your own family, with your own neighborhood. You'll be able to use skills that you learned from us. Anyway, thanks for letting me throw that in there, Christy.
I want to just kind of echo what you said about the training program that y'all put on. I think that, folks listening at home might think, okay, well, if they're not paid, like what can recovering from religion really offer me? What do these folks really know? It is actually really rigorous. I went through that training. I spent 3 years working as a suicide phone call operator, and the skills that I learned at that job lined up perfectly with everything that I learned in y'all's training. It was actually amazing to see a lot of the same ideas presented in a lot of the same ways. It was really intensive, and it's a really wonderful community of hardworking folks.
It is, and they're very hardworking. We've got a lot of people doing it. But thanks for telling me that. I don't think I'd ever heard that your comparison of that training. And it may even be more. We've added a few things to it probably since you went through it.
Sure.
We're always improving it.
I went through right before the pandemic, and then decided I gotta shift my time usage a little bit here. But no, great work that y'all are doing, and the fundraiser that Ethan is putting together has a really impressive cast list. So if you haven't seen at least the promo, I really encourage folks to check out the link in the description of this episode and give it a look. Great, good. Yeah, well, we've got a whole stack of really great calls coming in. So I want to start off with Tim in Arkansas, because you're speaking my language, Tim. These are a lot of experiences that I've had before, but tell us a little bit what's on your mind tonight.
Sure. I just mainly wanted to call in and report my experiences. I just happened to be on the Slack helpline community right before you guys came on air, and so I was right in the middle of it. It still hangs heavy on my heart to this day, all these years later.
Just talking about your experiences really with purity culture and the impact they've had on your life.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that I would directly attribute being raised in the middle of what I was to torture. I think I would choose that word, or terrorism even. It's the abuse of children. It's the indoctrination of fragile, innocent minds. And with the way that I was raised in particular, it's only been in listening to and reading Darrel Ray's books that I've really begun to get some sort of a handle on. Hey, this was pretty messed up. What I went through. Seeing a partial birth abortion video before I even kissed a girl. Seeing just all of these different things that really turned me off to sex. And today it's I'm in a pretty asexual place for the moment. And it's relationships. I've never been in a relationship that's been like longer than a month, unless you include an online relationship. And I attribute so much of it to just all of this different stuff where you learn from such a young age that just such a basic, fundamental component of yourself is secret and dirty and sinful and shameful, to borrow from the Mystery Science Theater crew when they talked about it in one of the riffs. It's just so messed up, and I don't know if I'm truly in a better place about this stuff, but at a minimum, I wanted to call in and just say that there are people out there that are absolutely dealing with this stuff. I was in the middle of it, and it's left a lasting toll all these years later.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear that, Tim. As you know, you're inside of our community. At RFR, you've heard it from other people too. You're not the only one, are you?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to jump on here is, I've never called into a show like this before in my life, and I just wanted to, at a minimum, try to offer some support if I could, to talk about this, and just to maybe free up other people to talk about their own trauma. It's a difficult thing, and what makes it so difficult is when you don't even recognize it as trauma, because it's your normal growing up and no one's ever even told you any different.
Right.
Yeah, having reached that place where you're able to kind of reinterpret your own experiences and notice what was damaging about those stories is really valuable. It can be so hard to denormalize things that everybody around you was also going through. Is there anything that you might highlight for our audience that you've now been able to reinterpret or maybe understand a little bit better and identify as the trauma that it was?
Can you ask that question maybe a different way? I think I understand what you're asking, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, what is something that you experienced that seemed normal at the time that you now look back and feel really upset about or notice the damage that it caused?
I think one of the shortest answers to that would be that modern American Christianity seems to be obsessed with controlling people's sex lives, literally from birth, from male circumcision to, on a political level, controlling women's bodies, to just so many levels of it. In terms of specifically, I think the thing that really hurts the most is what's been referred to in some books by cult experts that I've read called bounded choice, which basically means the intentional and willful denial of information that could lead to a person making a more informed decision.
Bounded choice. That's an excellent way to characterize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you kind of offering your insights and telling us your story. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight for us before we say goodnight?
I think it would be that I really appreciate what you guys are doing. That was one of the other reasons that I wanted to call in, is I just wanted to personally thank Darrel Ray for the work that he's done and continues to do, because this has been, I think, a splinter in my mind driving me mad my entire life. And the problem is with how group dynamics work. You can very well grow up in this information, just in this culture for years and years and years and years and years, until you're able to somehow get outside of that circle of disinformation and misinformation and lack of information, like through reading a book from a person that's in a group dynamic, like Darrel, that you'd never otherwise maybe see. You have no way to know it. Right. I definitely say you're not alone. I think a lot more people struggle with this trauma than I think we really realize. And I think what's so alarming about it is, like, I think Darrel Ray's book. I think it was The God Virus, but then I went on to read his book about sex and God. I think it was called. I think what just really hit me was that in all my years of growing up, for all of the education I had received, I had never even once heard the ideas that were presented in there. Not once.
Mm-hmm.
Not even to straw man them. I don't think even.
Wow.
It's just amazing how, it was just like emerging in some ways. It was really like emerging. If you've seen The Village, with M. Night Shyamalan, it's kind of been like that, where it's just like you think you're living a normal life, and then one day you wake up to realize that you've just not been exposed to some very fundamental information.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you for those kind words, Tim. I appreciate that. And I'm glad you're a part of our community,
Sure.
and perhaps you can help other people at the same time. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a great rest of your show. Like I said, I just, this topic hits me to my core, just getting made fun of for having a different opinion on this, and just so many different levels of all of this stuff.
Good.
Hey, I appreciate you calling in. You have a great night.
Good night, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Good night.
Yeah, these are big ideas, and they have a really lasting impact. I'm in a relationship now with somebody who, grew up Catholic, and she talks a little bit about that experience, but I think it wasn't until a couple of years of dating that my atheism activism really made sense to her, because when she thought of herself as like, well, yeah, I grew up religious, and like, yeah, he grew up religious, it's taken years of kind of swapping stories and not trying to compete over it, but just expressing like, yeah, that was a thing that happened to like 3 people I knew, or this is something that I experienced every day, for her to really recognize like, oh,
right,
that's not normal, that's not okay.
Yeah. Something Tim said I really want to underline, and that is that we heard it so much. It's just crazy how often we hear this, that once I left the bubble, the Baptist bubble, the fundamentalist bubble, the Seventh-day Adventist, whatever it was, it was like I had to start all over again, because my level of education was so inadequate. And I don't mean math education. I mean social skills. Understand biology, human biology, human sexuality it wasn't even that they had no education. It was that they had negative education. Everything they'd learned was the exact opposite of what actually goes on with humans and in our culture.
Yeah, we talked about that with Matt last week, actually. I was 25 before I went on my like actual first date, and I did not know what I was doing. It did not go great.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, that's a little bit more about me than anybody wanted to know. But, it is a challenging thing to overcome. But, I think that the point of Recovering from Religion, of the 2 books that Tim mentioned that you wrote that preceded it, of this show, is to highlight the fact that there is opportunity for healing, that you don't need to stay stuck in any of these things. And we'll certainly talk a little bit more about that at the end of the show, but I don't want to lose or miss out on that thread for anybody listening, that these things are big. The challenges that they create are meaningful, and the experiences that you've had are valid, but that doesn't mean that there isn't tons of opportunity for growth and change.
Right. We wouldn't be here tonight if we didn't believe that.
For sure. Well, let's jump in with Cairo in Montana. I'm very curious about your take on this, Dr. Ray. Cairo, what can we do for you tonight?
Hi. So I guess I just wanted to call in and talk about how purity culture can have adverse effects on people who are ace, who are on the asexual spectrum. And for me, I grew up Mormon, so it was very much like it was just kind of expected that eventually I would get married and have kids and have sex and all that. So it was just kind of like a thing that I knew I was expected to do. You know, that's what I was taught, but I was never like taught anything else, you know. Like I didn't even really know how to have sex for the longest time. But when I started dating, like eventually, because in my family, I don't really know how everyone else was, but in my family, like we weren't really allowed to date until we were 18. So when dating kind of became a thing for me and I started trying to date, like sex was obviously put on the table because, you know, a lot of people want to have sex and that's cool. But at the time I didn't realize that I was ace. Like I had no idea. Like I'd been abstinent my whole life, but also like I just wasn't interested in having sex with anyone. So it was really easy for me to do that. What I didn't realize was how much having like kind of like having sex without really understanding it and like understanding how like I am and who I am and how I operate would damage me in the long run, you know? And so it was kind of like a lot of times I would, you know, I'd like have sex with my boyfriend and then I'd just break down. I'd have like just a straight breakdown for no reason. I had no idea where it was coming from. And it like if I had, I guess like if I had the education and I had known that being ace was a thing, then like that could have been avoided. You know, I could have been able to communicate that with my partner and we would have been able to have a better relationship with everyone kind of knowing what's going on, you know? Right. And I've also heard, like, this isn't my experience because like I've never been married, thankfully, but I've heard a lot of other people who are ace who have gotten married young and then kind of been essentially forced into a situation where they feel like they have to have sex even if they don't want to, you know? So, and that's really hard on someone who doesn't like, who is asexual and who isn't really interested in having sex except for in like maybe very specific, you know, instances just on the spectrum, you know?
Right.
So yeah. It's like that idea of
sorry.
No, I'm glad that you raised that idea because it's an important one. You know, it ties back to what Tim was saying about bounded choice. It's not just that things like homosexuality or non-monogamous sex or any of these things are off limits. It's that ideas like being asexual or transgender or some of these other things aren't even presented as concepts. You know, it's not even that they're being refuted oftentimes so much as just completely ignored. And so folks are forced to go through life being told that they can only be within like a small range of options. And they don't see themselves reflected in any of that, which can create so much harm. What was it like to begin to find words for how you see yourself?
For me, it was like really liberating, and it answered a lot of questions for me. Like I grew up like I've never had a crush ever. I've never had a crush on anyone, and so when people would talk about their crushes and stuff, I was always so confused, and I didn't really know what that meant for the longest time, and. And then when like the term asexual, when I found it, I was like, oh shit, wow, like this makes so much sense now. Like this concept that just was completely lost to me for the longest time, like made things make sense for me. And it became just so much easier to like communicate with other people, like how basically like my own experiences and how I like the reasons why I react to some things the way that I do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, it was a really great, I don't know, like I always think that it's so important to teach young people about all of these terms and just everything that there is, because they need that information, if not for themselves, but then to share who they are with other people, because it's so difficult to explain things if you don't have the words to do it, you know? So.
And purity culture, as it's thrown at us in this culture through our lack of sex education, or I shouldn't say a diseducation, is when you see what kids are getting in school, they are not being told even those basics, Cairo. They're not being told that there even is such a thing as an asexual person, or transgender is not even a real thing, or they deny they're a real thing. Now, of course, religion is a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to sexuality. And that if you're not in that one size, then you don't even count. It's really the way it works. I'm curious about one thing, Cairo. Did you get any kind of what kind of sex education did you get in a formal way, either in school or in your church?
So in my church, nothing. Like my parents didn't even really tell me about sex.
Oh, okay.
Like it was kind of something, honestly, like I'm AFAB, and I won't get too far into this because it's like semi-personal a little bit, but like sure. I didn't even know what a period was until I had a period.
Wow. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So I was like super ignorant about it. And as far as like sex education, like formal in school, like all they really did was they took us into the library and they were like, here's, anatomy, bang babies, don't do it. Like that was
Yeah, and if you're lucky, they'll throw in a couple of like really upsetting pictures of different diseases and close-ups of pox and these ideas.
Yeah,
well,
I want a little bit about STD, but that was about it.
I think your call is awesome. I'm really glad you called in tonight for this reason. I have heard this so many times, a lot. I'm surprised sometimes at how many people have talked to me about about not even knowing what asexuality was until they're way past when they should have, and how damaging it was to be treated as if they should be one thing when in fact they learn later they're something totally different. It's your identity is so important to you. How you create your identity, how your identity is formed, and religion wants to dictate your identity to you. And that's what I hear from my asexual friends is my identity was denied me. Basically, I had no right to claim an identity because it violates. Well, it's true for transgender kids. It's true for gay kids. It's not just but I've heard it. I'll be honest with you. When I wrote Sex and God back in 2011-12 when it was published, I should have paid more attention to asexuality. I do mention it, but I didn't pay as much. If I was to rewrite the book, I would probably put a whole chapter on some of that stuff alone, because I've learned since then, and we're all learning here as we go, that I guess I hadn't realized what you're saying right now, Cairo. 8 years ago, this would have been news to me. So it's a bit of an education on my part as well. So thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys for doing all you do. The show means a lot to a lot of people, and it's really cool that you guys are taking the time and the energy to do this. So I really appreciate it, and I know that there there are tons of other people out there who really appreciate it.
Good. Thanks for telling us that.
Yeah, super kind to say. Thank you so much for calling in tonight. You have a great night.
You too. Bye.
All right. Well, let's do at least one more because we've got a pretty thick stack before we jump back into the interview. Yeah, it's a Thursday night. I can make that joke. Okay, let's talk to Nate in Canada. Nate, what's on your mind tonight?
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. My name's Nate. I'm a recovering from religion volunteer. I work on the helpline, and I also help moderate their online community, specifically sexuality and LGBTQ issues. So first off, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Ray said, the damage that this sort of purity culture can cause literally every day. It is the most ubiquitous issue in our community, especially when it comes to LGBTQ plus individuals. Just an hour ago, before I called in, I was talking down somebody who's dealing with the emotional fallout of these negative attitudes. So that's kind of why I joined, is to make my contribution there. So what I wanted to talk about, I am a bisexual man. I was with a woman for 6 years. We had 3 children. I'm now married to a man. We've been together for 11 years. But my grandmother has never met my children because to her, they don't count because we were never married. So she never came to any birthday parties. She's never interested in being a part of that. And people ask me, what's the harm? Why can't you live and let live? Well, this is the harm, right? Like, they're missing out on a grandparent's love. It's damaging. And further to that, my partner that I had children with, we were both the first person that the other ever came out to. We're both from religious families. Both had pretty unhealthy attitudes when we first met, and again, like, this is the harm that comes from this sort of thing, is that you've got people in their 20s who are just now coming to terms with their sexuality. It's very harmful.
I think it's interesting, Nate, and thank you for all you're doing. And Nate is a massive contributor for Recover from Religion. He's really helping a lot of people. But let me just say that you make the observation that purity culture affects the relationships between a grandparent and a grandchild. That is purity culture. I don't think a lot of people realize that. It's not whether a girl has a ring and a ball with her father, which is weird enough, but to blow away valuable relationships. That's what purity culture does. And it's not limited to just 2 people. I think that's what Nate's saying, and I really appreciate that. I think that's exactly right, Nate.
Exactly. And I had to explain that to my children as well, right? Why isn't Grandma here? Well, why don't we ever see Grandma Joe's mom? They had a great relationship with their paternal grandmother, but again, it inevitably comes up, well, where's the other one? And then you have to tell them that, and then they have to deal with that emotional fallout.
Yep. Difficult for kids, and they can't understand it. There's no way. But hopefully you're bringing your kids up and helping them understand their own sexuality. And I'm guessing they're going to be well educated by the time, well, they probably already are. I don't know how old your kids are, but how did you find yourself educating your
quite well?
Okay.
Oh, good. Yeah. Sometimes I think they like my husband a little more than they like me.
I think that just proves you're doing something right.
At least you found the right partner.
but even so, I mean, Nate, I'm really glad that you found a wonderful partner that you've been able to connect with, and that you found recovering from religion and are contributing there. And I, as Darrel said, like, I'm confident that you're giving your kids the best possible information. But I've got a 12-year-old on the other side of that wall who would be very embarrassed if he knew I was talking about him. But who I know also, like, as much as we teach him the right things and bring the right ideas, grandma is still there every summer, kind of whispering a lot of opposites. And, we want to be open to that, not just sever that relationship, but that messaging still gets in a lot of ways. And it can be really tricky to look your kid in the eye and say, like, well, we believe this and this is why, and it's for very good reasons. But other people believe something else, and to watch them wrestle with that. I know that that's life in a lot of ways, but when it creates division between kids and a parent, it can be really devastating. I'm hoping that y'all have found some luck and some peace in navigating those issues.
I think we've done pretty well. As I said, both of our families are pretty religious, and we've had to draw some boundaries, but I do let my mother and her mother, they take my children to church. And I've always been of a mind that if you teach a child how to think instead of telling them what to think, at the end of the day, you're going to end up with some secular children. And that has been the case.
Good.
For
Good
me.
for you. Good for you. Excellent.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that kind of insight with us. I think that is the key to all of these things. Darrel, your book, The God Virus, illustrated that for me probably better than anything else ever had. I had gotten to this place where I had recognized Christianity for the lie that it was, but it's not until you put it on the same shelf as Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism and these other things that you start to realize, like, oh, there's a whole system here.
Yeah. Right. Nate, thanks for calling, and thanks for all you do for Recover from Religion.
Well, thank you for taking my call. And again, tune in February 4th, your friendly neighborhood atheist fundraiser. It's going to be a banger, folks.
Great.
Hey, thank you so much. You have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, I would like to talk a little bit about how things are changing now when it comes to this idea of purity culture. I know that things like podcast and YouTube have made, information more widely available. Again, Tim mentioned this idea of like bounded choice and how religion can really keep us from being able to connect with words like asexual and other concepts. But does it feel like we're gaining ground? Like things are getting more, I don't know, free loving, or the pendulum swinging the other way?
I don't know if it's swinging. I don't know. I mean, I think we need to look at some research, and I don't actually have any research that I'm aware of or at the tip of my finger. But we can't deny that churches are having to start doing things different with respect to sexuality. What I am seeing, and what we see a lot of at Recover from Religion, is people saying, I left the church because, and then they'll give us a story about how their church treated their gay friend. Or they threw their best girlfriend out of the church because she got pregnant, So there's those kinds of stories. They didn't just lose the girl that got thrown out of the church. They lost her best friend too. So there's two for the price of one. And this is not uncommon. I'm seeing a lot of this. And then we're starting to see some changes within the churches. As you know, I say in the God Virus, religions have to mutate, just like biology, just like the COVID virus is mutating as we speak practically. Religions have to mutate too. And if they don't, then cultures leave them behind and the religions die. That's why there's so many dead religions. Well, if you look at the membership rolls, and these just came out recently, for the first time in history, Jehovah's Witnesses have admitted that they are closing down churches all over the world and losing members in record paces. In the past, the Jehovah's Witnesses have not admitted this. There's also some sociologists in Utah that have done some great research, and don't ask me for the citation right now. They were on the John DeLyn's podcast about a year ago, and they looked at why are people leaving the Mormon church, and they are leaving it in droves, And one of the main things was Proposition 8 in California, when the Mormons went out and tried to stop gay marriage in California. And then later the ruling by the presidency of the Mormon Church that children of gay parents are not allowed in the church. Those two things probably influenced people out of the church more than any number of arguments about the validity of Mormon theology. It was treating my family like shit because we have a gay kid in our family, or because I'm too gay. I want to marry somebody, same-sex marriage or whatever. So I think we're seeing, of course, we're seeing the Catholic Church mutating before our eyes. We're seeing Protestant churches start opening up to gay people and say, well, you can be gay in our church, just don't act on it. Well, they didn't even allow that in the past. And now, like, don't be gay. You can be gay, but don't be gay.
You would be gay. Yeah.
So I think we're probably 4 years. The data is going to be obvious 4 or 5 years from now. But I think we're seeing the beginnings of it now. Churches don't want to admit what they're doing to people. But if you just look at the statistics, and COVID kind of confuses those statistics, but giving has really dropped. Baptist Church, for the first time last year, Baptist Church documented that it has lost members. First time in the history of the Baptist Church that they have lost members. I don't mean a small number. It's peaked and it's going down. So, and if you ask people, why did you leave the church? It almost always has something to do with sexuality. I've met very few people that said, I left, because I figured, it was all a lie. Well, if you scratch a little bit lower, it's all a lie about marriage, all about premarital sex, or all about masturbation. The lie almost always has something to do with sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, just to evidence something that you've been talking about in preparation for this episode, I was just doing a lot of Googling on, what is purity culture? What is the history of purity culture? And trying to get a broad sense of how other people see these ideas. And I found myself on a number of Christian and other religious websites. I was actually really surprised to see the really intentional movement from the Christian church to, I guess, recognize, if not actually rectify, a lot of these problems. I know you talk about how religion sort of mutates in order to stay relevant. Mm-hmm. What do you see happening on some of these particular issues?
Well, if you look at Australia, for example, I'm very familiar with what's going on in Australia. No, the average American doesn't. But Australia had a big come to Jesus meeting, so to speak, with their judicial system. Because there, they don't rever the religious right to be independent of any oversight, or at least they don't now. And they found enormous damage by the Catholic Church. And so the political structure itself has now forced the Catholic Church to come to account. And that's great. I'm glad to see that. But within the same framework, and then with the same investigation, they investigated the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I have deep, close friends that were Jehovah's Witnesses, so I'm getting this firsthand from them. The government of Australia has basically said, Jehovah's Witnesses, you must join this scheme. They call it a scheme. That's the Australian word for it, or the British word for it. You must join this scheme or you will lose the scheme for redress of child abuse, sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Catholic Church joined the scheme and they're paying money out and doing, whatever they have to get the government off their back. But the Jehovah's Witnesses refused. So the consequence that happens on the 31st of this month is Jehovah's Witnesses lose their charitable status. So they permanently lose their charitable status in Australia until they join the scheme. Well, by joining the scheme, it means if there's a verifiable violation, they have to pay money to that person or that family, or just like the Catholic Church does. So anyway, I'm not sure that answered your question totally, but there's a lot going on, and churches are just now they're just now starting to feel the pain.
Adapting and yeah.
and they're going to have to adapt. And the way they're adapting is we'll do this, we'll pay them off, and then maybe they'll leave us alone. That's what the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania did. It paid off, and then thought they would get left alone, but they ain't getting left alone. I'm loving that. And as a result, parishes are shutting down all over the place. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Catholic Church is shrinking very fast in the United States. The Catholic Church would be in great danger if it wasn't for immigration. I mean, despite Donald Trump's ideas, immigration keeps religion alive, especially Catholic religion in the United States. Because the only people that are going to Catholic or increasing it are Hispanics coming in from traditionally Hispanic countries who are traditionally Catholic, of course. Mm-hmm. I get a really international perspective on this stuff because Recover from Religion, we've got volunteers from like 27 different countries, and we get chats from probably 90 different countries. So we get this information firsthand in some ways. Again, I don't know if I answered your question. I went off on my own rant.
No worries. I mean, I recognize that numbers are really difficult to put to any of these things, and I don't mean to ask you an unfair question, but just having done this work for as long as you have, being involved in creating recovery from religion and all of these pieces, I guess I'm curious how you feel personally about the direction that things are headed and what we can maybe anticipate for the future, because it sounds like you're describing some pretty meaningful losses for churches.
Well, there are, excuse me, but there's other issues going on, and that is I see, for example, and these you wouldn't think this is related to religion, but think of the incel, the whole incel movement, involuntarily celibate males that are organizing and creating a hullabaloo, or the Boogaloos, or the Proud Boys, or the QAnon. You don't think of that as religion, but let me tell you, they look a hell of a lot like a cult. And much of what their behavior, especially QAnon to me fits the definition of almost any cult. But these are cults that have really, really rigid sexual roles, and they see a very Christian, a very binary sexual world. Well, where did they get that idea? Where does the incels get the notion that they have a right to have sex with or without the permission of a partner? Period. And that anything but male female penetration is wrong. These are things that these people are still talking about. And if you look at the no fab movement, no masturbation movement, or the porn addiction movement, all these things are religious in and of themselves, whether they're even tied to a Baptist church or a Catholic church. The notions that they're putting out there, that if you masturbate, it takes your energy away. If you masturbate, you won't be a good sex partner when you do get married. I mean, these are religious ideas. They just pulled out of purity culture. And I'm here to tell you, I think, Chris, I'm going to go out on a limb here a little bit. Purity culture was aimed at women, controlling women's bodies. The consequences almost always went to the women or the girls. They didn't necessarily go to the boys or the men. However, what I think we're seeing here is kind of a weird backlash of purity culture. And that is the males are affected by this too. And as we heard from Tim, he was deeply affected by it. And when a male is taught certain inappropriate or bad ideas about what it means to be a man or a male in our culture and have sex in our culture and what sex is in our culture, they're raised with these bad ideas long enough. When they actually get out in the real world, they cannot function. And so what they do is they look for other people like themselves who have the same grievances, and they come together. And you get these incels, people who don't know how to relate to a woman, and they're pissed off because nobody wants to have sex with them. And it's nobody's fault but the purity culture. Purity culture taught this to them. That's my rant. That's where I think things. I think it's related to purity culture, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. No, I find this absolutely fascinating. We spoke with Dan from one of our sister shows, Truth Wanted, about the Red Pill movement, and actually we spoke to. Forgive me, I'm forgetting the name. One of the directors that you work with that was on our show a couple of years ago about the no fap movement. And these things do look like religion in so many different ways.
Yeah. And I tell you, the roots come from purity culture. I mean, because remember, the guys and the gals are in the same room listening to this. And it appears to be focused and aimed at women, at girls. But those messages are getting through the ears of the guys too. And of course, there is the independent thing that only women don't masturbate and boys do. So
right, naturally,
there's that aiming at the boys don't masturbate or you're going to mess up your marriage. Even if you don't believe that, you still may think that your energy, your quote, sexual energy might get drained by masturbating. And if you buy into that shit, and a lot of guys do, it's,
a lot of secularists do. A lot of folks that I work with on a daily basis who, come to me because of my atheist affiliations, still buy into a lot of these beliefs. So let me ask you to actually kind of spell this out a little bit. Like, you're telling me that masturbation is not bad for my sex life, yeah?
I'm telling you, you need to masturbate about 5 times a week just to keep the pipes clean. It's just a fact.
On it.
Now, if you want to do it more, go for it. But minimum of 5 times a week. Because, and here's the deal, that it's actually got real deep biological reasons. The sperm, a male sperm, is only good for about 5 days. It can't sit around inside of your body for more than 5 days, or it becomes senile. And that's actually the word for it, senile. Well, you don't want senile sperm because they don't know which way to go. But so what you're doing is you're purging your system of sperm that can't do their job. And then that stimulates the production of new sperm. If you don't masturbate, if you just let that stuff hang in there, when you do have sex, if it's for procreation, you may not be able to inseminate the eggs, so you'll be infertile. And I don't know how much this is, there's been a major decline in infertility in the West. I don't know what's causing that. Nobody does. But what if it could be traced back to the fact that guys aren't masturbating enough to keep their sperm fresh? I don't know.
I mean, it makes a certain kind of sense.
It's a hypothesis. I won't go too far out on that limb, though.
Sure. Well, we've got a couple of callers left and a little bit more time. So
okay,
I'd like to touch base with Marie in California. Marie, what can we do for you tonight?
Hey, great to be on.
Hey, thanks so much for calling. What's going on?
Yeah, so I just came across this on Facebook the other day that you guys are doing the call, and I went through the ringer growing up in a Midwest town in the 90s, and going to Christian camp, and just got that whole message of, save yourself for your husband, be pure on dates, the whole modesty thing. Like, I remember at summer camp, we couldn't even have a bikini. And I'm not from the deep south. I'm from just Iowa kind of culture. So calling in and right before the show, I was talking with a friend about how he's like, you're 36 and you've been out of the church for 10, 15 years and you're still dealing with it because you don't learn how to look for a good partner, how to date, all that stuff, because God's going to take care of it. And then just add on top, anytime you do anything sexual, even just masturbating or thinking lustful thoughts, you have to deal with all that guilt that God's mad at you because you were lustful or sinned against him,
Yeah,
I sin against him frequently. Thank you.
Well said.
Me too.
Well, just to say, an idea we haven't talked about much tonight, and maybe it's obvious, but I think is really worth pointing out, is just how many relationships have fallen apart because they were forced together without the opportunity to really identify or talk about their sexual chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sex is not what makes a good marriage, but it is a part of most marriages. And if it's really bad sex and you're somebody who is looking for that as an important part of a relationship, well, guess what? You're 18, 20 years old and locked in for the rest of your life to something that's not going to meet your needs because you were told that it'll be fine, that, your wife will do her husbandly duties and then men will just be great with it and it'll all go wonderfully. And of course, we're not here having this conversation because it goes wonderfully for everybody.
Marie, I don't know. And you can always plead the fifth or not respond if you don't want to. Were you, did you get married or have you been married? And if you did, were you married at a young age?
I have never been married, and
Okay.
I'm 36 now. Just had some shorter relationships, and I'm actually sometimes I'm bummed that I don't have a partner, especially during COVID. But then I remember, oh my God, what if you got married to that guy you were dating when you were like 22 in college and going to an E-Free church?
Yep. Bad idea. I don't know how many people, and I will confess, I was one of them. I know a lot of people who got married so they could have sex. And that's what purity culture does to you. I got married at the age of 20, and I probably should, and I shouldn't have. Now, don't get me wrong. My ex-wife is a great woman. We're still friends. We had 2 great children. But we were sexually incompatible from practically the day we were, married. And I know a lot of people who did that. That's partly the reason I asked that question, Marie, because I've heard it a lot. But be glad you didn't marry the wrong person. That's for sure.
Yeah, I went to Germany for a year when I was 21, and when I was in Spain, I had sex with a guy from Argentina named Javier. So I busted out of that. That probably was part of me deconverting, was beginning the sexual experiences for myself.
Talk about that, would you? Tell us a little bit about how sexuality impacted your deconversion experience. I think that's always interesting to hear.
Oh, that's a much better question. I was just thinking that I wanted to hear about Javier from Argentina in Spain. A bottle of wine, a few slices of cheese, and I'm listening to you all night. But no, talk about Darrel's thing. That's probably better.
It was a nightclub in Spain on the coast. So there you go.
That was pretty cool to me.
Yeah. So how it affected deconversion? Well, I think so. I was over in Germany, went on a little vacation to Spain, and then was thrust back into the United States about a month later, back into my college Christian culture. And I just was like, I feel shame and bad about having sex, but it actually opened up a whole new world. And everybody in Germany that was my friends, when I told them I finally lost my virginity, they're like, you have a lot of catching up to do, girl. And it just was so welcoming, and like, they didn't seem to have any problem with it. And so I had to do that cognitive dissonance for a long time of like, well, I think this is technically wrong, but I'm having fun, but oh my God. And I think it just kept cracking and cracking and cracking the foundation. And then I dated a guy later in college who was Catholic, and because I was born again, I went through all this horrible, relationship OCD. Where you're spinning your wheels wondering, like, should I date this guy? Should I not date this guy? Oh my God, guy's mad at me. And when we finally broke up because of that, although thankfully, because I would have had 10 kids living in Wisconsin, it kept cracking that foundation of like, well, is this really wrong that I'm dating a guy that's Catholic? Like, what the fuck? And then a year later, I moved to California, became a tour guide, taking people to national parks, meeting people all over the world, and then ended up going to Burning Man. And
wow.
Completely crumbled.
That's a long way away from barefoot and pregnant Wisconsin.
This is
right?
This is great. I'm loving this call. You're hitting the number 10 on the caller list today.
I mean, I can just see a whole cascade. But real quick, one thing that really broke it was, did you ever know who Donald Miller was, the writer, Blue Like Jazz, Christian writer?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I am familiar.
Yeah, and he was just much more gentle than, like, say, John Piper.
Oh,
yeah,
I
sort of
hate
like a soft, progressive type of like hip Christianity from the like late aughts.
To his dismay, it was a line in his book that actually really crumbled the cookie. I was reading my Bible because I'm supposed to, but I got bored with it, threw it on the floor, and went back to playing SimCity. And to have somebody be that honest about that, because I've been to Navigators, I've been to all that shit. And everybody's so excited about God and excited about keeping their purity and excited about it. They're probably lying. That little statement that like he could actually be human. Javier had happened, all this stuff had happened, and it just went boom into the foundation. That like it's okay to be a freaking person. And all the sexual shame was definitely part of the foundation crumbling. There are several different things that went on. And now, like, sex doesn't ever shame me. It's just I never knew how to talk about my needs, because why would you? You were never supposed to learn that you like oral sex when you're young or whatever. And so that's just been a hard thing in life because of that. But maybe my sexual experience, totally took me down the deconversion route.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, I have had 3 girlfriends that told me stories almost identical to yours. They went to Europe and had a fling and came back very satisfied. Let's put it that way. One of them I was dating at the time, and she was going to Europe. She came back, told me all about it. I mean, we had a lot of fun talking about that, by the way. That's very erotic. Well, thank you, Marie.
I appreciate you giving us a call and sharing your stories. And our email address is sex@atheist-community.org. Just in case you have any travel pictures that you want to share with us, just throwing that out there.
Well, and I guess one question that came up as I've been listening tonight is like, with a story like that, do you think there's a good niche for helping people recover, like especially women?
Oh, unquestionably. The fact that you've been through it yourself definitely has given you a set of skills on how to come out of it. And Recovery from Religion is actually a great organization for just that, because of the preparation and the training that they offer. So I absolutely think that there's not only healing for yourself, but some real resources that you can offer to other folks.
Marie, come and volunteer for us. I will guarantee we can find you a place that you can talk to women all day long. We actually have a channel in our community, women only. There's nobody but women are allowed in there, and I'm not even allowed in there. I have no idea what goes on, but I'm told it's a no holds barred kind of place.
Yeah, that'd be great. So I just go to the volunteer part, huh? Or email you guys.
Hit the volunteer button on our website and do that. But let me say one final thing. It sounds like you do have some things you want to work on, and that is how to express your own needs and talk about your own needs to whatever partner you've got. And I think that's, once you get through that, you've hit the gold mine. Mm-hmm. And I'll just recommend a woman named Betty Dodson, who just died a couple of months ago. One of my heroes, one of my 2 or 3 heroes in sexuality. Are you familiar with Betty Dodson?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, just look her up. Maybe read some of her stuff. She wasn't particularly highly educated, but she sure made a massive impact on women and women learning to accept themselves, their own body, their needs, and communicate those needs to their partners. So get out there and look at Betty Dodson. And there's other people that were probably as good as her, but she was my personal hero. All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. I guess
All right.
an orgasm today.
Great. You
Get
got
right
it.
on that as soon as we wrap up. Thanks so much for calling tonight.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Well, I'm glad that was our last call for the night, because that's kind of the question I wanted to pose to you before we wrap up, Darrel. Like, I know that this is obviously central to the never-ending mission of this show, but what are the tools for breaking free from this kind of pain or this sort of mindset?
I think, and this is Darrel's go-to tool for almost everything sexuality, and that is, you are the first sex partner you'll ever have, and you are probably, and maybe, the last sex partner you ever have. So pay attention to yourself, pay attention to your body, learn how to give yourself pleasure, learn what your needs are, and you can't possibly communicate to another person what you want or need if you haven't explored a little bit yourself. Now, I will say this also, that once you do get in a relationship with somebody, once you've had some experience with another human being, and I'm just mean another human being, I don't care what gender they are, an experience with another human being teaches you even more about yourself. I have so many times in my life recognized that a sexual relationship is not all about the sex. I mean, to me, the most interesting part of the sex act happens after the sex is over, and we're just sitting there talking about what we did today, or what we want to do tomorrow, or what our concerns are and our emotions, because the hormones that are released in our brain through sex allows us to relax and communicate with another human being in ways that you probably couldn't do before the sex was over. So there's two things there. Number one, learn yourself, masturbate, use porn, do whatever you have to do to learn who you are. And second, when you do have sex with another person, enjoy it and learn about yourself and what you want, and learn how to communicate that to your partner. So that's two tools. And I think men and women alike can benefit from what Betty Dodson did. She was focused on women, of course, but a lot of what she said applies to men too. And it especially applies to some of the shit I'm seeing going on in the incel movement and the QAnon and, all these cults that are rising up that have a fucking basis in bad ideas about sexuality and the role of men and the role of women in our society. I could talk all day about this. You know that. So
yeah. Well, and I'll just remind folks that there are links to Betty Dodson's work, as well as a number of other folks that we've talked about, that I'll make sure to include in the show notes to this episode. And I guess just to say, there are so many opportunities for change. I've said it a couple of times tonight, and I just want to continue to beat that drum and let you know that these are all issues that you can heal from. And there's so much on the other side of this kind of pain. So there will be links to a lot of that information when you're done watching this episode. But before we get out of here, I want to make sure to thank everybody that helps make this episode possible. All of the folks in our crew. We have an incredible cast of folks who put together a number of different pieces.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much for all of your hard work. And Darrel, I appreciate you joining us again. It's been too long since we've had you on the show.
It hasn't. It's my own darn fault. I've been so busy with recovering from religion. It's not because I don't love you. I've been neglectful in our relationship, but I'll try to be better in the future.
I've heard that before, and I've been hurt before. So be gentle with my heart.
I will try. There's a couple of last things. We got time for a couple of things?
Please do.
Okay. One thing in answer to your earlier question I wanted to add, and that is if you're having trouble getting over the idea of masturbating or enjoying yourself, I would recommend a little exercise where you just get your lube out, you get your, get naked or whatever you're going to do in your quiet place where you're private, and focus on the pleasure. And then also, as you're doing that, you'll hear the purity culture messages coming in. This is bad. This is wrong. God doesn't want this. Jesus hates me. Whatever it is that's coming through your head. Pay attention to those thoughts. Just let them come into your head, even as you're playing with your clit or your cock, and just let them come in and let them float right on by, and then let the next one come in. Let those things be there. Don't fight them, because when you fight them, you give them power. But I think you should just acknowledge them, say, thank you, I'm glad you told me that, and move on. Get the next one. And pretty soon, I think what you'll find after, it doesn't happen in one session, but after many sessions, maybe 4, 5, 10 sessions over a period of 2 or 3 months, I think you'll start seeing those things disappear, and you can start paying attention to your body. You can start paying more attention to your partner and what they want. It's a really interesting exercise. I recommend it frequently to people.
Yeah, I've never heard radical acceptance applied to masturbation, but it fits perfectly.
It does, doesn't it? And last but not least, go find out about Recover from Religion. We have lots of services that people who, if you just want to talk to somebody about your sexuality, we have people that will talk to you. It's all free. You can chat in, you can call in. And after you've done that, and if you feel good about what you receive, you can ask them to invite you to our community, or you can come in and talk to 1,500 other people that have the same problems you've got. And it's all anonymous. It's all, we respect everybody's confidentiality. We're just here to help people. That's all we want to do. And if you can give us a few bucks, this is our fundraiser right now, between now and Thursday, when we'll be on, actually on Wednesday, I'll be on Matt Dillahunty's podcast, and we'll be talking about the fundraiser too. So I'll be on the Hang Up next Wednesday, and then I'll be on your friendly neighborhood atheist on Thursday. So it's a big push to get us out there and let people know we exist, what our services are, and get some donations from folks. Thanks for having me on today, Christy.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, again, Recovering from Religion, recoveringfromreligion.org, and then details about the fundraiser, partnering with your friendly neighborhood atheist. That's all in the show notes to this episode. Otherwise, I think it's time. Darrel, I feel like I have to let you do this. What should everybody out there go and do for themselves?
Everybody should go out there and give themselves a big orgasm. Or give somebody else a big orgasm.
Give somebody else one. Y'all have a good night.